The U.S. Air Force is facing some challenges. It isn't ready to fight in a war against China. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. For decades, the U.S. Air Force has dominated the skies. It boasts cutting-edge technology, including development of sixth-generation fighter jets. But some say the Air Force actually is unprepared for a real war. The U.S. has been focused on fighting against enemies who don't have air superiority. It hasn't been worrying about dealing with near-peer competitors like China. Until recently, U.S. leaders believed that the U.S. was too powerful and that there was no way other countries could come close to it. For example, in 2009, then Secretary of Defense Robert Gates said China is projected to have no fifth-generation aircraft by 2020, and by 2025 the gap only widens. The U.S. will have approximately 1,700 of the most advanced fifth-generation fighters versus a handful of comparable aircraft for the Chinese. Unfortunately, that really aged poorly. Gates and many other U.S. officials underestimated China's ability to steal U.S. tech and mass-produce cheap knockoffs. They also greatly overestimated how many fifth-generation fighter jets the U.S. would produce and have ready. Contrary to Gates' predictions, China is closing the gap, and in some ways even surpassing the U.S., especially when it comes to missiles. Meanwhile, the U.S. Air Force is shrinking. Yeah, shrinking. It went from having over 4,300 fighters in 1989 to half that number in 2022. It's even worse for bombers. During the same time period, the number of bombers dropped to a third of what it was in 1989. And the number of aircraft actually available for war is much smaller. That's because military planes keep falling short on combat readiness. According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, there are 49 different types of military aircraft across the U.S. Army, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps. For each type of aircraft, there are readiness goals. A certain percentage of the total number of aircraft of that type that exist are supposed to be available and ready for missions, which is to say, maintained in good working order with crews available to fly them. But out of 49 types of aircraft, only 4 types met their annual mission readiness goals consistently between 2011 and 2021. Half never reached their annual readiness goals, despite the Pentagon spending billions of dollars on aircraft maintenance. Of course, according to Air Force Times, some leaders have begun shying away from those rates as a meaningful sign of combat readiness, saying that statistics like sorties logged and maintenance turnaround times offer more insight. But the readiness statistics for armed forces aircraft are still concerning. As for the Air Force specifically, only 7 out of 10 planes were available for combat missions, training, or other routine operations in 2021. It's especially bad for the F-35 fighter jet. Air Force Lieutenant General Mike Schmidt, who heads the F-35 program, says that as of February this year, only half of the F-35 fleet is mission capable, and less than a third are full mission capable. Since there are only 564 F-35s in the Department of Defense's inventory as of March 1st, that's not a whole lot of mission-capable F-35s. And there aren't a whole lot of other planes available in the Air Force these days either. Overall, if we take out the aircraft that are not combat ready and the ones used for training, there were fewer than 1,000 fighters and 59 bombers ready for combat as of 2022. That's probably not enough to fight China, especially when the U.S. has to divide up its forces for domestic security and deployment in other parts of the world. So why does the U.S. Air Force have so few aircraft? Part of it is thanks to post-Cold War budget cuts in the 1990s, which have had a long-term effect on all U.S. military branches, not just the Air Force. The U.S. military kept rationalizing Air Force fighter cuts by claiming that fewer is better, that there'd be enough to fight in regional wars, and that it would be cheaper to upgrade existing fighters rather than buying new ones. But there's only so much that upgrades can do, especially for aircraft that were built in the 1970s and 80s. And America's reliance on fewer aircraft has actually made things worse. It forced the U.S. Air Force to overuse aircraft. This in turn wore down the planes faster, which in turn required more repairs and money to pay for that. It's gotten so expensive that the Air Force has to retire more aircraft to focus on maintaining the rest. The U.S. Air Force recognizes that it needs more aircraft, modern ones at that, which is why it's aiming to retire 310 old aircraft by 2024. It plans to fill the gap by getting 72 new fighters every year. But this could provide an opening for the Chinese Communist Party, and it doesn't help solve other problems that the U.S. Air Force faces. I'll explain how after the break. Welcome back. The U.S. Air Force desperately needs to get in shape to fight against China. One of the ways the U.S. Air Force is doing that is by planning to retire 310 old aircraft by 2024. That way, the money that is currently dedicated to maintaining those aircraft can go to other things like purchasing new aircraft. Ideally, though, the U.S. Air Force should have kept the production line flowing so there wouldn't be a drastic drop in aircraft in the first place. Building up the replacements will take time, especially as the U.S. military deals with supply chain bottlenecks. Be that as it may, the U.S. Air Force plans to request 72 new fighters every year to replace its old aircraft. This stems from former Air Force Secretary Heather Wilson's call in 2018 for 74 more squadrons by 2030, a 24% increase over the current 312 squadrons. Whether the U.S. will actually get enough modern aircraft for that to happen remains to be seen. According to Defense News, for years Congress has approved fighter procurements that are below the Air Force's desired goal. And budget requests have often been asked for less money than Air Force leaders think is really needed. Come on, you guys, haven't you ever heard of the big ask? However, the fiscal 2024 budget proposal released in March broke that trend by directly asking for money to buy 48 new F-35As and 24 F-15EX Eagle IIs. Who knows if the U.S. will be able to pump out 72 fighters a year, but even if it does, it'll take way too long to build up. It still probably won't have enough combat-ready aircraft in time for war with China. Remember, some think China may try an invasion of Taiwan by as early as 2027. The same goes for its plan to update the U.S.'s old E-3 airborne warning and control systems with the newer E-7. The U.S. Air Force plans to get 26 E-7s by 2032, with the first two prototypes ready in 2027. So nearly a decade from now, the Air Force will finally have all of the E-7s at once. Given how long it'll take for the U.S. to build up its aircraft inventory, China could see this as an opportunity to attack Taiwan while the U.S. Air Force remains weak. Meanwhile, the Air Force is also struggling to find and retain recruits, especially pilots. The service was more than 1,900 pilots short of its 21,000-person goal last October. Part of it is because current pilots have become burned out by non-stop deployments, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan. Many find it more attractive to work for commercial airlines, which are willing to pay far more than the military since they have their own pilot shortage to deal with. The U.S. Air Force is trying to get pilots to stay in the service with incentives, such as higher bonuses for pilots to stay another 4 years after their 10-year commitment. Another idea floating around is for the Air Force to offer more flexible contracts, such as the option for full-time and part-time work. The U.S. needs to keep pilots with actual combat experience since war with China could be right around the corner. But the U.S. Air Force also needs to ramp up recruitment for new pilots. Last year, the service put fewer than 1,300 airmen through undergraduate pilot training, even though it typically aims for 1,500 new pilots a year. The Air Force is even struggling to hire instructors. About a quarter of all simulation instructor jobs remain empty. The service is so desperate for more people that it's willing to loosen body fat requirements. In the meantime, the U.S. Air Force is looking to use drones to complement manned aircraft. The goal is 1,000 drone wingmen along with 200 next-generation air-dominant stealth combat jets. These drones are what's called the Collaborative Combat Aircraft Program. They'd be able to carry out a variety of missions, including intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, striking targets, and electronic warfare. Totally the type of thing that China would copy. As far as we can tell, however, getting this many new drones and next-generation air dominance jets up and running will also take the U.S. a lot of time that it can't afford to give to China. So what do you think of the U.S. Air Force? Leave your comments below. If you like the show, remember that we rely mainly on direct support from viewers like you. All it takes is as little as $1 per episode over on our crowdfunding website, Patreon. Visit patreon.com/America Uncovered for more. Click the link below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.